Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, like him or not, Bobby Jindal has certainly been one of the state's most unusual governors in terms of style and agenda. With qualifying in the race to succeed Jindal now only 6 months away, we'll look tonight at the governor's impact and enemies and how both will affect the next election. Since one of Jindal's key areas has been health care, we will examine the condition of the state's hospitals. Elsewhere, St. Bernard's Parish president struggles for his political life, and UNO struggles for its fiscal future. And our Future Watch segment examines the implications of the new federal flood risk standard. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Richard Thompson, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Errol first this evening for some reflections on our Governor General. But first, you wanted to talk about what happened this afternoon. Attorney General Kenneth Polite had a press conference.
It's been a long time since we had one of these Friday gatherings with the U.S. Attorney announcing a politician in trouble. In this case, it's Ira Thomas, who's a member of the Orleans Parish School Board. And what was issued was a bill of information, which isn't the same thing as an indictment, but it's still not something that you want to have issued against you. And what he's accused of is taking a bribe for $5,000 for a janitorial contract. So we'll see what happens from there. But this is really, it's been a while since we've had a public official who's faced this type of action. And I know, Stephanie, you followed some of the other things that went on with it.
Sure. Again, this is breaking news as of now. Ira Thomas, bill of information generally means, we can't say for sure, but it generally means somebody has agreed to plead guilty. So I think we can probably expect that, although the U.S. Attorney hasn't said and Ira Thomas is not saying so as of now. We don't know whether he'll resign as of now. $5,000, it's not much. It's even less than what they got Oliver Thomas on. And but apparently they've got him. There's videotape of him accepting this money. There's a cooperating witness. It was apparently reported or described as a campaign contribution. Of course, $5,000 is a legal campaign contribution. What would have to be illegal would be some sort of arrangement of a quid pro quo, which is often very hard to prove. In this case, it seems like they have some cooperation and also evidence on videotape.
Well, joining U.S. Attorney Polite at the podium also was FBI Special Agent in charge. You said this is an ongoing thing. This is a real time.
Exactly. So we don't know if it's going to reach other people. We don't know. This is something that I think we didn't really know was in the works until today.
One thing I had when I heard this is that no one, myself included, pays much attention to the school board anymore. It's not as big and as powerful as it used to be. And if
it doesn't control many schools anymore.
Right, yeah. But that is, I'm not saying anything corrupt happened, but that makes corruption easier when nobody's paying attention to what's going on, and especially when you're in a position to deal with a lot of contracts.
And Ira Thomas, he's a former cop for one thing, so that's interesting.
And police chief at Suno.
Exactly. Was a candidate for sheriff recently, has run for office repeatedly over the years before he finally got elected to the school board.
And criticized Marlon Guzman for corruption in the sheriff's office.
He's a divisive figure on the school board, but not over corruption, really over some kind of racially charged issues having to do with schools.
All right. Well, for now we have to move over to Governor Jindal. And I know you wanted to sort of reflect on the kind of governor he's been.
Well, in the media, we're always looking for anniversaries of sorts or pre-anniversaries. And this Sunday will be 6 months before qualifying begins for the statewide elections. So to me, that means, that's like being at the starting line. We're at the point now where people are going to start lining up. The politics has already been there. Jindal has been a curious governor because so much of Louisiana's culture, even its folklore, is of colorful politicians, with Huey Long and Errol Long and Edwin Edwards. Even Mike Foster, who was a recluse, would go home on Fridays on a Harley Davidson. And but Jindal has been just the opposite. He's been the anti of all of that, someone who's been very much removed, not at all a public figure. When he ran for governor 3 times. The first time he was defeated just barely by Kathleen Blanco, but won the next 2 times. He barely debated. He did 1 or 2 debates. And so the public hasn't seen him. And I was thinking, I bet among our audience out here, which is a fairly sophisticated audience, probably a lot of them have never seen Bobby Jindal in person during the time. But yet he's built a strong political base. He's gotten his message across, which is very conservative. message. And the people who have seen him are people in conservative Louisiana, people at church revivals. And so he's been a very, very, very unusual politician. The Economist this week referred to him as an intellectual, which is a phrase seldom used with Louisiana governors, even though I think there have been some. But they're talking about his presidential prospects and called it a long shot. But he has been just a very different kind of person. And in a sense, one day people may look back and say he was a terrible governor, but other people may look back and say that he corrected a lot of things. He put back in the balance things that were imbalanced.
What kind of shadow is he going to cast, though, over this upcoming election? We got to move into that segment
Sure,
right
the
now.
governor's race. Well, there was an interesting story that in the National Journal, which is a national publication, that I think explained a lot of what we know, which maybe people out there in the country didn't know, that you have Bobby Jindal, the governor, very powerful, and then you have David Vitter, the U.S. senator, very similar profiles. They're both Rhodes Scholars. They both served in that first congressional district. They're both intellectuals, certainly, very talented politicians. Used to be allies. They hate each other. Openly hate each other. And what was kind of interesting about this story is the reporter got Jindal to say, turn off your tape recorder and I'll tell you what I think of that guy Vitter, which I don't know that he meant that to be on the record, but it was published. And Vitter has been taking shots at Jindal kind of indirectly for quite a long time now over his management of the state, saying things like, when I'm elected governor, we're going to have a special session right away to deal with the, structural tax issues. Bobby Jindal should be doing that now. I will do it as soon as I'm elected. It's this kind of backhanded, Bobby Jindal's off running for president while he should be taking care of business here. There's been a lot of that from David Vitter, a little pushback now from Bobby Jindal, but I think it's going to be so interesting to have this gubernatorial race playing out while Jindal is off presumably running for president, because this is a guy, he's really probably the second most prominent Republican to voters out there, and he's going to spend the year bashing Bobby Jindal and talking about all the things Bobby Jindal did wrong and he will do differently. As will the kind of next most prominent Republican, Jay Durden, who's also the lieutenant governor, who's also running for that seat, who, again, these three guys, none of them like each other. It's this kind of...
and these are all Republicans.
These are all Republicans. Yes. When, the state government went all Republican, I wrote a column a few years ago.
Republicans behaving like Democrats used to behave.
Maybe, or it's like this three-headed monster. But really, I think what we're seeing already, even this far out, is the dialogue is going to be very much about Bobby Jindal and what he did wrong and what these new guys will do differently, Republicans and Democrats. Now, everybody's in on it. The Democrat, John Bel Edwards in the field, he had a good line where he basically said, any of these Republicans would be like Bobby Jindal. They're all distancing themselves, but, Scott Angel, who's the public service commissioner who has the closest ties to Jindal, he's Jindal incarnate. Jay Durden, who's a little more moderate, Jindal light. David Vitter, very conservative, Jindal on steroids. Jay Durden's going to have a little bit of difficulty distancing himself, although he's starting to. He's trying. He's talking very much about how he's a Louisiana guy, doesn't have further ambitions. One thing this story said that I think it got somewhat wrong is that, this is going to be hard on Jindal having Vitter not support him. It's also going to be hard on Vitter having Jindal not support him. I don't think that's right at all. I think David Vitter is very proud that Jindal does not support him and, will try to imply that he supports Scott Angel.
Well, Jindal has always been very effective at getting votes for himself.
Yeah.
I don't know if he has a political base to deliver.
He has never, even when he was very popular, of course, his popularity has gone way down in recent years, but, those other races you were talking about, the only contested race he's ever run was the one against Kathleen Blanco, which he lost. After that, he, didn't have strong opposition at all, either when he ran for Congress or governor both times. And again, remember when he ran for Congress, there was the guy named Steve Scalise, who he just kind of pushed out of the way and went in and took that seat. Now, Steve Scalise, we all know, is a very good politician. Look what he's done since. But he had to wait for Bobby Jindal to take his turn before he even got to go to Congress. I think he's out of practice in terms of the rough and tumble because he hasn't had a tough race in so long.
I think Scalise knew Jindal wouldn't be occupying that congressional seat very long.
Yes.
And so because of that, I think Scalise was willing to stand aside.
And also he was having trouble raising money. Yeah, it did.
So for this governor's race, are we seeing many forums now occurring?
We are. It's starting really early. I think the field is taking shape. We have the four candidates, as I said, the three Republicans, the one Democrat. There are still rumors that maybe Mitch Landrieu is looking at it. Maybe Jay Durden will pull out. Maybe, although that's kind of hard to... he's lieutenant governor, and at this point there's a very active campaign to replace him as lieutenant governor.
And he's been actively campaigning for a while,
He
too.
has, yes. Now David Vitter has raised much more money, and he's really trying to set himself up as inevitable. One of the things he's doing, he's actually announcing endorsements from out of state, that to kind of create the impression that he is the Republican. Rand Paul is one of them, the senator, very presidential candidate, probably very popular with libertarians, as his father. The other day, he announced George H.W. Bush is supporting him. So there you go.
Okay, there we go.
Not the son necessarily, but
okay. And so Governor General will continue to be on the national stage, not so much in Louisiana.
Exactly, but this budget, he can't avoid dealing with this budget because it's rough, as we've talked about, and
Definitely.
we'll continue to.
Okay, we'll be talking about that in a little bit. We're going to go over right now to Richard, and you've been covering the trials and tribulations of Dave Peralta and St. Bernard. They just sort of keep mounting. What's going on with him?
He has faced mounting legal problems in St. Bernard and also St. Tammany for about the last year and a half. And so now we're starting to get some kind of clarity on how this may start to pan out. In St. Bernard, he was charged, as we know, with last April with one count of sexual battery in an incident in which his ex-wife alleges that he had brutally raped her in their home in St. Bernard, whereas his defense since then has been on insisting that the couple had engaged in bondage and that this was something they'd done periodically. They were into this, and that was the same on that morning.
And they were still married at the
When they were still married at the time. They've since divorced. And so that happened, and then a few months later, he was then indicted in St. Tammany for stalking his ex-wife, and she has alleged that he had sent her emails and possibly also a letter in the mail as well. And so he's been in and out of court a lot in the last few weeks in both parishes. And in St. Bernard, the Attorney General's office has recently said that there's almost a near certainty that they're going to be charging him with additional crimes there. Anything that could include conspiracy, malfeasance, witness intimidation, or obstruction of justice. And that would really cast a new look on this whole case.
So the grand jury is hearing testimony about all of this, right? Is investigating it. And as you said, the state attorney general, so they are prosecuting this case.
They're prosecuting the case both.
In both parishes. So there were hearings this week, right, in both cases? In both cases, and basically what's coming out of these hearings and what do we anticipate in the weeks ahead?
Well, what they've said in St. Bernard is that there's an almost near certainty that he'll be recharged, and that would essentially halt the proceedings that are playing out now. And kind of set the clock going again. And so there's a trial date currently set for April, but that would presumably be pushed back until the fall at the very earliest, if that does come to pass. They've also said that there's a good chance that somebody else could be indicted in St. Bernard as well.
So does any of this impact the St. Tammany case?
This doesn't impact the St. Tammany case, and right now that's set for trial at the beginning of June. And so it seems as though if the Attorney General's office is looking to try to convict him while he's still in office, that would be their best shot at doing so.
Now, some records have been sealed, right? Didn't that happen in a court hearing? What was that about?
There was an effort in St. Bernard by his President Peralta's lawyer to steal the records there, and that was denied by the judge who's overseeing the case. But in St. Tammany, the records have been sealed so far. So there's not a ton of clarity on what the allegations are against him in that parish.
And of course, Mr. Peralta is maintaining his innocence on everything.
He's maintaining his innocence on everything. He is also insisting that he intends to run for re-election in the fall. And as we're just months away from the primary and the qualifying period, that's also started to have people lining up considering their own run for the parish's top job.
Okay, Richard, thanks a lot. Over to Dawn right now, Future Watch, and you're going to be telling us about some flood risk standards that really have some people extremely unhappy and worried.
Very worried. It's the new federal flood risk management standards that were signed by executive order at the end of January by President Obama. They update standards that were put into place by executive order by President Carter in the 1970s. And what these standards do is really shift away from flood control to risk management. And instead of building in a way that, or fixing things after a flood to try to manage it better and prevent damaged properties. And these standards will impact anybody who's using federal dollars or requires federal approval to build. Well, when you start looking below the surface on that, that's a whole lot of people who are impacted. I talked with the executive director of New Orleans Habitat for Humanity. They're impacted if they have to build to some of these new standards because they receive federal grant money. Any project that would require water right-of-ways or building on a floodplain requires federal approval. So businesses, homes, not-for-profits, it all could be impacted. There is a charge being spearheaded locally, really, by Michael Hecht, who's the president of GNO Inc., who also helped spearhead a charge against the Biggert Waters Act, which about a year ago was a congressional act that really was going to send flood insurance rates here to a point where nobody could afford them. You know, your federal flood insurance was going to be 3 times or more that of your mortgage.
Well, these standards, how drastic are they?
They have not been implemented yet, and there is no telling when implementation will happen and how it will be enforced. But there are 3 choices in building. Building based on a freeboard value approach, which is 1 to 3 feet above current base flood elevation or the 100-year floodplain. Build at the 500-year floodplain,
which go real high.
Yeah, I don't know how many elevators we all might need to bring our groceries that high. Or build using the best accepted climate-informed science approach. Well, since none of it, and that's what builders have told me. That's what Jim Pate with Habitat for Humanity told me. Nobody knows what the best accepted climate science is. So what this really does is this shift away from what we've always done as a nation is look to historical data to see where we build. Instead, this is supposed to be projecting science forward, and it's creating a lot of fear. This group headed up by Michael Hecht, it was across 30 states and multiple organizations back when they were fighting Biggert Waters. It is that big now as well. It's multi-state because this isn't a Louisiana thing. There were groups talking earlier this week in Iowa and Mississippi, in California, in Virginia, anywhere where you're
How about New York?
It all started as a result of Sandy to try to make sense with building. And the impact down the line is what everybody's scared about. There's a public comment period through April 6th, and that's kind of after the public comment period ends April 6th. That's when we might have some understanding of what this really will do to building here and rates here. And they say it's not going to impact federal flood insurance for existing construction, but it might for new construction.
I'm sorry about that. One of the things that Michael Hecht did when they were fighting this Biggert Waters last year is he really helped put together a coalition of states affected by this. There's a real partnership now between the New York, New Jersey folks who were hit by Sandy, people in Florida. There's now almost a caucus of states that are affected by flood insurance. So if they're able to hold that together, there's some real political power there.
There's political, there's business across the board. In all these states, real estate builders, everybody who says, what they say is, yes, we agree. We don't want to see things fall down and get rebuilt and fall down and get rebuilt. But you across the nation need access to our port and our oil and gas and our everything. And the people who provide employees for oil and gas and for the port need somewhere affordable to live. So if we make buildings so expensive that they can't afford to live and insurance so expensive that they can't afford to buy it, then we might have to build in floodplains.
But that is a dilemma because we need to create sustainable communities if you're going to build anywhere near these threatened areas that we live in right now. So how do you reach that happy medium? So
we might find out in April, but I doubt it'll be that soon.
And so public hearings start and
public hearings have happened. Are starting to happen. There was one in Iowa and one in Mississippi this past week. The public comment period wraps up April 6th.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Dawn. Okay, Richard, over to you. And our universities are really struggling. I mean, public universities facing a really big whack with the budget situation as it is right now. They're hoping it won't be as bad as what it possibly could be. And University of New Orleans is really taking some steps to try to adjust. What are they doing?
They have been. I mean, there have been some pretty grim predictions coming out of the University of New Orleans for much of the past year. They just got done with a total reevaluation of all of their 80-degree programs to try to look for ways that study trends and see where academic shifts might be going, where the students may be enrolling in the future. And so just at the end of last year, the president there had recommended cutting, I believe, 7 programs, 1 department, and maybe about a little more than 24 positions to try to save some money this year and money going forward. And so as they're just getting ready to do that, they now get hit with additional cuts from what the governor has proposed so far in his budget.
And if his budget is accepted, I mean, it would still bring the cuts to what, about $218 million or something like that?
Around there, yes.
For the state universities. And it's not just public universities, and private universities are having to restructure too, both Loyola and Tulane.
That's right. In the last few weeks, Loyola has announced that they're doing a reorganization as well, partly due to dwindling enrollment in the last few years. And even Tulane has announced in the last few months there, the president, that they've faced a $15 to $20 million deficit for the last few years. And so they've hired an outside consulting firm to come in, look for efficiencies, and try to restructure their budget in a way that brings different departments more to the table to become involved and active in the process.
Richard, with the UNO plan, doesn't part of it to put more emphasis on the have an arts component, like really develop a really strong reputation there?
That is something they've announced in the last few weeks, to try to start a school for the arts, which would combine their 5 arts-related departments there, including theater, arts administration, under one roof. And what they're saying,
I think the key word there is movies, because I think movies,
film as well.
Yeah, they see it as a real driving force to build a strong arts department.
And so what their idea with this is that it's almost just a rebranding to have a school of the arts to be able to attract more students. And what they've estimated within 3 years that it could bring in another 280 students. And maybe $2.8 million a year annually, and that's money and students they could really use there.
And that's an area where there are students looking for jobs in those fields, as opposed to philosophy or something.
Especially as we're trying to cultivate this cultural economy here in this city, having a school of the arts would really be a flag for that.
And it would remain under the College of Liberal Arts?
It would, yeah.
Okay, within. Okay, Richard, thanks a lot. Okay, we've been talking budget problems, Stephanie, and we know that we're facing a really brutal legislative session with a $1.6 billion budget deficit. And it's impacting how is that going to impact our hospitals? And we also are seeing some other changes in hospitals.
There's a lot going on in the healthcare world right now in a lot of different areas. And of course, we're all healthcare consumers, so it's all important to us. We've talked about this over and over again. Higher ed and healthcare, whenever there are budget cuts, they bear the brunt, because those are the 2 big areas that are not protected in the state constitution. We're hearing a lot about higher ed. I think we're going to be hearing more about healthcare in the coming months, in part because this giant hospital in New Orleans is getting ready to open. And Governor Jindal introduced his budget, his preliminary budget. Of course, the legislature can do what it will with it. We're just at the beginning of the conversation, but we already know that the people who oversee the privatized public hospitals are saying that it's $142 million short of what they need. And specifically the New Orleans hospital, $88 million short. And this is as this hospital is preparing to open its doors probably this summer. And, it's going to be really tough to see. It's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Well, we don't know. I mean, legislators from New Orleans are absolutely raising, the roof on that. They're really going to try to do something about it. But it all comes back to, can we find sources of revenue in this budget? And that's going to be what we're going to be talking about for the next X number of months, I think, probably every week.
Well, they can't afford not to have anything open. So
they can. So they'll open it somehow.
It'll be a partial opening or a delayed opening.
The opening was pushed back this week. They say that's construction related,
exactly,
right?
But the timing was interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
A little suspect.
Elsewhere in the hospital front, we had some big news out of West Jefferson Medical Center recently. They signed a deal with Children's Hospital, which of course is supposed to be running the big hospital in New Orleans too. You'll remember East Jeff and West Jeff hospitals tried to find a deal to kind of jointly operate the 2 public hospitals. That fell apart as things that, whenever East Jeff and West Jeff try to get together, things seem to fall apart, and that did fall apart quite a while ago. But the West Bank Hospital actually went back to Children's, and they now have a deal, 45 years, $225 million with $340 million in capital improvements.
And Jeff Council has signed off on that, right?
And they've signed off on it, so that's happening. What's happening, and that leaves the East Jefferson Medical Center kind of by itself as everybody else is joining systems. One of the initial suitors that had pulled out of the deal for the 2 hospitals is a company called HCA, private for-profit company out of Tennessee. They're now back in it, so there are conversations going on. This is the one that the East Jefferson board and the East Jefferson staff supported in the first place. So that could happen. It's preliminary. Excuse me. other things going on. Up in Baton Rouge, there's a hospital in Mid-City in Baton Rouge that is closing its emergency room and it's causing a big ruckus up there.
Is that Baton Rouge General?
It's Mid-City General.
Mid-City General. Okay.
And again, it's they're getting a lot of spillover from the public hospital that had already been closed. And really, what people are saying is this is because they can't afford to treat all the uninsured people that they're getting. And that you really can link to the fact that the state, Governor Jindal, has refused to take the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, which would have cut the number of uninsured. And of course, the federal government is cutting reimbursements to hospitals to treat uninsured because they want states to accept the Medicaid expansion.
Which leads us to the Supreme Court hearing on the challenge to Obamacare.
Exactly. So that's one group of people, the people who would qualify for the Medicaid expansion if we were taking it. There's another group of people in Louisiana, about 165,000, according to federal estimates, who have purchased insurance on the private exchange and gotten subsidies. These are generally middle-class people, working class, middle class. They're not the poorest of the poor.
And it's a federal exchange.
It's a federal
it's
exchange,
not a state exchange.
And that's the key thing, because states had the option of setting up their own exchanges or just using healthcare.gov, the federal exchange. And there was what was really a drafting error in the law that opponents have seized on and now taken this challenge to the Supreme Court that says you can only get the subsidies if you are on a state exchange, not a federal exchange.
And so if that happens to all those people who have signed up for Obamacare, what happens? Their premiums go up? Or they lose their insurance?
They lose their access to subsidies, which means many of them will not be able to afford it. Now, Republicans, many Republicans in our delegation, Bill Cassidy, Steve Scalise, are cheering for this to happen, and they're saying don't worry, Republicans will come and pass something and everybody will be fine. I think if you know Congress, you have to be a little skeptical of that.
A little bit skeptical.
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll be watching certainly closely for that Supreme Court ruling. Right now, it's time to look ahead. Thanks, Stephanie, by the way.
We know you drive around and people say, well, why doesn't someone do something about the homeless people? Well, the Downtown Development District is doing a little something. They've actually hired a homeless outreach specialist who has experience in these sorts of issues, who's working with the people, going out and trying to help them. And it's a joint program between the DDD and Travelers Aid, and maybe it's a good idea.
All right,
okay.
Stephanie?
Different topic. If you've been following the Pelicans, you know they've been on a pretty good run, including without Anthony Davis, who's now back. If they win tonight, if they beat the Celtics, they are going to sneak into that last West playoff spot, at least for today.
All right.
It's still going to be a fight to get there.
Thanks, Stephanie. Done.
Sports theme as well. If you've missed it, the LSU women's gymnastics team is second in the nation. They have their last at-home meet tonight in Baton Rouge, and they have Mary Lou Retton's daughter committed to compete for them next year.
All right. Thanks a lot, Don. Richard?
In a rare sign of agreement today between BP and the lawyers who are handling the litigation for the suit, BP withdrew its appeal to try to remove the lawyer who's been overseeing the multi-billion-dollar settlement of private claims. So be curious to see in the next few weeks as we approach the 5-year anniversary if that kind of good mood continues or it'll be back to the back and forth we've seen so far.
All right. Thanks a lot, you guys, for being here. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.